Hi, James here from XM2. Today we're going to be installing a Crossfire receiver into our Titan XL5 iFlight drone and showing you how to install it and configure it. So there's a couple of reasons you might want to do that. For me, I've got this Tyrannus that I've been using for a long time and I want to keep using. Or if you're starting to push the range and you want to get to the limited video range and you don't want to worry about your RC link, that's another reason you might want to put Crossfire in. So first step, let's take off the top plate. Okay, all the bolts are out. Step 2 is going to be get the antenna in. So the Titan XL5 comes with an antenna mount for the Crossfire Immortal T antenna at the back. So we just need to get the antenna in there and run the cable. So we need to poke the UFL connector through this little hole at the back underneath the GPS. Poke that through. We'll just run the cable out the bottom for now. And now we need to get the Immortal T into its holder, and that requires a little bit of persuasion, shall I say. So you just need to flex the really flex the TPU mount, and you're going to have to bend the antenna as well, which is a little bit uncomfortable, but it's all right. So you flex the mount open, bend the antenna, get it into that hole, and then everything will kind of fit into position. Shuffle it all around so it's even. Bend that antenna back if it got bent. And there we go. Now we've got the antenna in, so we need to run this cable up to this spot up here. So this little TPU printed piece is a tray for the receiver to sit in. So we're going to need to run the coax connection into that. So just get that UFL connector, poke it up through, and we're going to run that up into and through the tray. Use our tweezers to pull it through. And there it is in position. So it's coming through the GPS mount, up into the tray, through the tray. Now it's just hanging out there ready to connect. Okay, cool. So next we're going to take our Crossfire Nano receiver, and the next step is to wire this up to the flight controller. So mine's already got leads on it because I ripped this out of another build. If you're just getting it out of a packet, then it'll come with leads that are this length, so they're going to be a great length to install it. You'll need to tin the wires if you haven't already. These are already tinned. And then we're going to tin the pads on the flight controller. So the pads we're going to need to tin for this is we're going to need to tin ground, 5 volts, R5, and T5. Let's get our soldering iron on, get some solder. Just going to tin those pads. Okay, so let's get that wired up. So the first two connections are obvious. We're going to have ground to ground. We're going to have 5 volt to 5 volts. Okay, and then the next ones. So on the receiver, you've got ground, you've got 5 volt, and then you've got channel 1 and channel 2. That's the order, and I'll pop up a diagram on the screen. So channel 1 is going to be your Crossfire TX, which is going to go to the RX pad on your flight controller. Channel 2 is your Crossfire RX, which is going to go to the TX pad on your flight controller. So for me, channel 2 is yellow. So yellow is RX. It's going to go to TX on the flight controller. So if you look at the manual for this flight controller, they actually recommend using UART1, RX1 and TX1 for your Crossfire receiver. But that requires pulling the S-bus cable out of the lead that goes to the air unit. And I'm opting not to do that. Instead, I'm using RX5. And what that means is that I don't need to pull that cable out and modify it for the air unit. And it means that if I ever want to go back to using the air unit as the receiver, I can do that just by reconfiguring the flight controller. I wouldn't need to go and resolder wires. So I think it's much nicer to just use a different UART. So I'm going to take my yellow cable, which is channel 2, and I'm going to connect it to T5 on the flight controller. That's UART5 TX. And then I'll take my white cable, which is channel 1, which is Crossfire TX, and that's going to go to RX on the flight controller. Beautiful. Okay, so that's all wired up. Now, what I'm going to do is, before I get this all, mounted and installed, I'm going to check it's working, because there's nothing worse than closing the lid on the whole thing and then realizing you've soldered something wrong. So what I'm going to do is get that UFL connection plugged in. There it is. So I'm just sitting that there. It's all plugged in, making sure that it's not shorting against anything since it's not protected. But now I'm going to power it up and see that it works. So we're going to start our configuration now. So I'm going to pull out my trusty X9D Special Edition. And I've got the Crossfire micro module in there. So I'm going to need to bind that Crossfire module to the receiver that I've just installed. And to do that on the Tyrannus, hold menu, go Crossfire, go Micro TX, go to bind, and go into bind mode. You're going to see binding. Now what I'm going to do is power up the drone. So we've got a red light on the receiver. Now I'm going to press the bind button, which is a little button on the receiver near the antenna connection. You can see that starts flashing green. And I just got binding OK on the controller. So that is what we want. Okay, now that I've done that, I can exit out of this menu. And now I'm going to plug the flight controller into the computer, and we're going to see if we can get this configured and talking to the flight controller. All right, let's plug this in. Okay, so we're in Betaflight here. The first thing that we're going to need to configure is the serial ports. So under the Ports tab, UART1 is connected to the DJI FPV receiver, and we've just connected the Crossfire to UART5. So we're going to turn off serial RX on UART1 and turn it on serial RX on UART5 and save and reboot. Give that a minute. Okay, next step is we need to change the protocol to Crossfire. So we go into configuration, we scroll down a little bit, and here we see under receiver it says serial-based receiver and it's set to S-bus. So we're going to change that to CRSF Crossfire, and we're going to hit save. And that's going to reboot again. We'll give it a minute. Here we are. All right. Let's see what's going on here. So now let's go to the receiver tab and see what we've got. So The receiver tab, we see that the sticks are moving when I move the sticks. So that's good. It means our receiver's talking to our flight controller correctly. But the channel mapping is not set up right. So my throttle is mapped to roll. Everything's all wrong. So the channel mapping here is AETR. So you're going to want to go into your, your model on your Tyrannus or your radio and see what the throttle order, what the order is. I've got it set up here as TAER rather than AETR. So to fix that, I'm going to type that in there. TAER. Hit enter, hit save. Okay, and then if we look at our little model down there, now we can see that it's doing the right thing. So when I yaw, it's yawing, throttle does nothing, and I can pitch and roll, and it's all going in the right direction. So that's great, and it means that the channels are all going through in the right order. So now that we've done that, oh, by the way, if you didn't see your sticks moving at this point, the one thing that would be left to check is that your receiver was set to output Crossfire protocol. They are set to output that when you buy them, so this isn't something that should be a common problem. But if you've repurposed one from another build where you were using S-Bus and you needed to change it, you'd just go into long press menu, you'd go Crossfire, you'd select the Nano RX, and you'd scroll down to the output map, and you'd check that output 1 and output 2 are both set to Crossfire TX and RX respectively. And that should fix that problem if you encounter it. Lastly, we're going to go to the modes, and it's a different transmitter than we had set up before. The aux channels are going to be different. So I'm just going to go through and reassign those. So I've got my arm and my angle. So to change the arm, I'm going to set it to auto. And when you set it to auto, it means it's going to pick up whatever switch you move next. So then I'm going to move my arm switch. Hold the throttle down. Armed. And it's picked up aux 1. And then for angle, we're going to set that to auto 2. And I'm going to select my angle mode switch. And it's picked that up as well. So now I hit save, and just to double check, when I go and armed, you can see that it's not going to arm because it's plugged in, but that otherwise it would be fine. As far as configuration, that's all we need to do in the software. It's all configured now and it's ready to go. All right, so I'm going to want to get this receiver to sit in that little tray there. And ideally I'm going to put a wrap of heat shrink around it if I can get it on. It's going to be a little bit difficult because there's such little length on this coax. So you can see what I've done there is I've pulled the receiver through the tray and plugged in the UFL connector on the other side of the tray. This is just going to give me a bit better access so I can get a little bit of heat shrink on there and then hopefully slide it back into the tray, because the length of wires is a little bit short, so it's a little bit difficult to get this in a position where I'm going to be able to use the hot air gun on it. So clear heat shrink's always nice for this because you want to be able to see the color of the LED in case you have ever problems with your transmitter or your Crossfire. You want to be able to see if it goes red. So I'm just going to cut a little bit of clear heat shrink there. I believe if you just buy this and pull it out of the box, it actually probably comes with a bit of heat shrink that's the right size. Just going to slide that on. Now I'm going to use my heat gun and we're just going to shrink that. Now we just need to slide that into the tray. Now you note that with my pliers here, I'm only pulling at the heat shrink. I wouldn't want to use these pliers and grab at the board because I might damage it, but it's all right to pull there on the heat shrink. All right, so now we've got that real nicely wedged in there inside the receiver tray. It's heat shrinked, so nothing's going to short no matter what happens. and it's really tight in there, so it's not going to move anywhere. But I'm super happy with that. That's a really nice, neat install, and it's not going to go anywhere. So only thing that's left is to put the top plate back on. So I'll chuck that on there, wiggle the camera support in, and do up all the bolts. Okay, so there it is. It's all mounted up. The antenna's really nicely positioned at the back. It's just a really nice feature of many of the iFlight drones that they come out of the box with mounts for various different receivers. So when you go to put something different in, like a Crossfire or an RXSR, you're not having to 3D print or CAD anything. It all just drops in there into the tray and the mount. So that's super nice. The only thing I didn't show before when I was configuring it, which you'll want to do, is just verify that the failsafe still works. So I'm going to show you that now to make sure that you see how it's done, because that's always an important step to installing a new receiver. You've got to make sure that the flight controller registers the failsafe. So to do that, I'm going to plug everything back in, turn my transmitter back on.
Throttle warning, flight mode acro.
Going to plug back into Betaflight. Okay, so to verify that the failsafe's working, what we're going to look at is on the right-hand side here, on the main screen, you're going to see arming disable flags, and you can see MSP and GPS. So right now the transmitter's on. To make sure the failsafe is working, I'm just going to turn off the transmitter.
Still connected.
And I'm going to see that RX failsafe comes up in that arming disable flag. So that's just a really important check to make sure that the flight controller knows when the transmitter is disconnected, so that if you have a problem with your system, your transmitter, the drone will go to failsafe rather than just flying off. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If this helped you or you like this content, please hit that like button. And if there's anything else you want to see around iFlight drones or just Betaflight in general, leave us a comment and we'll see what we can do. Thanks.